Saneel, the floor is yours.
Excellent. So I'm talking about a subject called media design, which is a made-up phrase, but I think kind of lays it out. But to start that, if you'll pardon me, I'm going to start with a brief history of advertising, not Bashar brief, an actual brief history of advertising and media. And to at least make it mildly interesting, I thought that I would use the media du jour, which is Facebook, to tell the story. So some important context here, which is, in the mid to late 90s, traditional agencies spun off their media departments as their own companies. And they were pretty excited about that because they literally grew the pool of ad revenue. Because suddenly all these media services that hadn't existed before, they could start charging for. Things like communication architecture and all these phrases that didn't exist. Media departments loved that because, hey, they had a seat at the table and they were no longer subservient. What's interesting, though, is then immediately after that, relatively immediately, they'd already moved on to, traditional agencies had already moved on to acquiring digital agencies. So now, they kind of separated some services out, and now they were actively looking for a digital agency. And, these guys making up the digital agency were a bit different, maybe, than the traditional agency folks. They'd been in advertising maybe a little less long, and they had a very distinct culture as a digital agency. So what's interesting, though, is even though the digital agency acquisition at most major agencies happened a very long time ago, the traditional agency and the digital agency, in most cases, at most of the major agencies, again, there's exceptions to everything I'm going to talk about today, but in more cases than not, and in this case, the vast majority, their processes remain completely separate, right? So the digital agency, whether it was acquired or started as its own brand, worked very differently than the traditional agency. And there would be all these ongoing conversations about processes. Years later, they're still talking about the best way to integrate the digital agency into their traditional agency process. And one thing that was really interesting is when you look at these relationships, that traditional agency in many cases sees themselves as concepting the idea and then asking the digital agency to, translate those ideas into, quote, digital. So a couple of consequences of this. Well, one, after the creative department and the media department split up, there was they've gone their own separate ways. Media departments and creative departments at this point have they have different clients. And so they might be a part of the same holding company, but they have different clients, different processes, different goals. To steal a phrase from Doug, you could say they were unaligned. And then another consequence of all of this activity was that digital agencies really started focusing on technology. And if you look at what happened, it makes sense why. Because basically, as digital agencies, one, they were being told that the traditional agency was the ideas agency, and we're going to concept and do all these things, and then you guys translate things into your world. And number two, they were becoming a part of a culture, a traditional agency mindset that is one about efficiency. Traditional agencies, in general, are very execution focused, right? I mean, the titles of the people tell you that. You're an art director, you're a writer, and then at some point you become responsible for creative ideas. But there's no formalized process to get you qualified or trained to do that. We're all in this room because we're very good creatives, and so we've risen to the top of this organization, but you've probably done it in spite of your organization as opposed to because your organization got you there. And then eventually, if you look at creative departments, it isn't just that the media departments spun off altogether, but the digital agency was doing all the technology and all the actual manifestations of the ideas. So that left the creative department with very little interest in media. I mean, basically, they were isolated from media because, hey, you make your ads, hand it over to the media agency to place, or in digital environments, it's just gone. It's a baton, and they're off and running. So in this weird kind of 10-year period, 15-year period, creative agencies became very isolated. Meanwhile, on the media side of things, media underwent tremendous change. I'm not going to bore you with a lot of statistics because we all know change is happening, but I want to point out a couple key points. Number one, consumers were more connected to each other than ever before. We all know this on Facebook, and we're personalized friends, etc. But I think that sometimes we have a tendency to talk as though, hey, media lets us stay connected to people that we already have a personal connection with. But the reality of it is, in many cases, media is the only connection between people, between consumers. So I bought a TV on, let's say on Amazon, and I let 3 to 5 reviews of people I don't know, I don't even know if they're male or female, where they live, but I've let that influence my purchase behavior, right? Michael posts a video to YouTube, and Eliza responds. They don't know each other, but they've managed to media is the only thing connecting these consumers. And that's a pretty dynamic change from anything that's happened prior. The second thing is, okay, media is fragmented. This is not a point that I think we need to belabor. Let's assume that media is more fragmented today than it was yesterday, and it'll be more fragmented tomorrow than it was today. At this point, there's too much evidence that I don't know if anyone would disagree with that statement. The second part of it, though, is the ever-changing part. And this is the thing that you hear a lot in agencies, and many of the people in this room can attest to this, which is this idea of, hey, once things settle down, once media finishes this shift that we've had. But the reality of it is, this isn't a shift that we're not in the middle of some weird turmoil that's going to settle, right? This isn't a war that's broken out and we haven't figured out who's won. The new state of the nature of the beast is one of ongoing change. So we are in the permanent state of ongoing change. So, and when I say permanent, I only mean 3 to 5 years out, because I've never pretended to know anything beyond that. And that's pretty important, because a good example of that is I looked at the top 15 web properties from 1999. That's only 10 years ago. Many of these companies were valued at hundreds of millions of dollars. Huge, and you would expect a top 15 list to shuffle around in 10 years. But when you go back and look at it, what's scary is those top 15, 7 of them don't even exist anymore, literally wiped off the face of the earth. And then you look at what's happening today, and we all talk about Facebook. 6 years ago, no one in this room had heard of Facebook. And many of you were probably using Friendster. And somehow in between, you might have done something called MySpace. So this isn't a weird, just things are mixed up. But many of these properties actually have a bit of a bell curve happening. So there's the, tied to some of the stuff Sergio was talking about around a hype cycle, but specific to media. And again, all the while, so as the world's completely turning upside down, a really important piece of context for this is that creative departments were sitting on the sidelines, right? I mean, they were not at the forefront of what was happening in media because of organizational and structural changes and decisions that holding companies were making. And so they became a bit isolated. So a couple consequences of this. Consumers controlling media, we all know that. Again, there's been enough said about it. What I don't think has been said enough is that consumers are controlling traditional media. It's very easy to say they control new media. That's a given. But they've started applying those expectations back to their traditional media. So we talk about it with DVRs a lot. We all did the case on Saturday of TiVo. But if you look at all traditional media, print, which is in Europe and in North America on its last legs, and these are companies that are doing their best to reinvent themselves, and at this point the only option they have left is to hand control over to consumers, whether it's e-readers, whether it's giving away online content. I mean, they're handing over the keys because they're at that point. It's over. We have to do this, otherwise, we don't survive. So, DVRs, print, radio being brought down by podcasts, online streaming, et cetera. And then the other consequence is how media are connected to each other, right? So we all know about media multitasking, right? In the U.S., it's 100 people, or 100 TV viewers are online while they watch television. 100 million are online while they watch television. 100 million in the U.S. alone. I mean, that's 20 times the size of Ricky's country. So so multitasking happens. But what's interesting is whether we try to build those experiences together as brands to connect media, it's still happening on the consumer's terms. So a great example is, I don't know how many people watched the Obama inauguration, but literally hundreds of millions of people saw it around the globe. And it was being streamed online by multiple sources. And I'm going to use CNN as an example. CNN streamed this, and they did an overlay of Twitter and real-time responses. So CNN has tried to combine these media. But if you look at it, they didn't control any part of it, right? The content is not theirs. Obama's going to do and say what he wants to do. The people responding that is showing up in this other media is all just the people. And all CNN has done at this point is provide a framework. And that's it. So again, this control and these connections are happening completely on consumers' terms. So what is the impact on creative ideas? That was really what the point of my thesis was, is how does this change creative ideas? And I found kind of 4 key points here. The first one is that new media and the creative ideas within them are intrinsically linked. So, when people are working in a traditional media, they tend to sometimes talk about digital as another distribution point, We actually had a couple people come in and talk about music this way. Yeah, digital is a new distribution point. I don't know what the big deal is. I can't think of anything further from the truth. The content is impacted by the channel. If you leave with one thing today, let it be this. The content is impacted by the channel. So this idea of I'm going to make an idea and drop it into a container doesn't make sense anymore, because in a new media environment, that container changes it. So getting back to the music example, it isn't just that digital let people buy MP3s. It changed the actual music in and of itself. People were less interested in albums, right? People used their friends that they were now connected with to curate the music. So people right now, a number of statistics prove this, listen to more bands and more genres of music than ever before. But somehow radio listenership has gone down. And that makes sense, because the idea of mixing and matching your music, the cost of doing that, the labor intensity, is quite low. This is something that didn't exist before. You can mix a CD, you can make a mixtape, but literally you can do this on the fly with no effort. That changes the type of music people are buying. It changes what bands are relevant, what bands are going to be successful. So the actual content has changed. The second point is that new media vehicles require customized creative ideation. Look, there's no such thing as standardized creative ideation. I think we all know that. But even though I know I'm known as the digital guy in the room, surprise, surprise, I work on a ton of traditional media. And when we do this, when I make a TV spot, for example, I don't have to think about if that spot's running on NBC, ABC, or the BBC, right? I mean, that is a standardized, this is I deposit it and it goes. I compare that to, let's say, the gaming industry, right? So it's like, oh, we're going to do games. You can't just make a brand experience and drop it into games, right? Because Halo, which takes place in the year 3000 on a different planet and is a first-person shooter involving space marines, is a whole different environment than, let's say, Mario Kart, where a princess and a mustachioed plumber are trying to beat each other in a race. You can't standardize what you're doing in these environments, so you have to have a custom solution for one, a custom solution for the other, and a custom solution for the other. That's a very distinct difference. That was not the case prior to the new media revolution. The third impact is that the executions must evolve, right? So again, actually, David, you had a wonderful quote the other day at dinner between champagne juleps, which was, creatives don't ever finish their work, they just abandon it at some point or another. Because they'll never be done if you let them, as you can tell by the laptops that are open, finishing their presentations. The idea, though, is that traditional media forced you to abandon your work, right? At some point, it had to be done, and it was off. It was out of your control, and there was a synchronous absorption of that content. So everyone saw your TV spot because it aired. Everyone saw your print ad because it was on the newsstands. But let's say you put up a Facebook page today. A year from now, someone else could encounter that same Facebook page. It's asynchronous. So if Facebook has changed, and people have changed, and you've abandoned that page, you've actually done a disservice. Your idea must evolve to stay relevant in a new media environment. And then the final kind of shift in impact on creative ideas is that they must offer some form of utility. So although I think it's blasphemy at the Berlin School, I'm going to disagree with our friend Bob Greenberg at RGA. Because when we went to RGA, you guys will remember, they talked incessantly about advertising via entertainment is dead, right? And so that's the old school way of doing things. I don't buy that, but I do think that utility, entertainment can be utility. Some people just want to enjoy something. They want to, Michael Conrad called it I want to see that again. Yeah, and that's one way of offering utility. Facilitation is another way. Information is another way. But either way, these ideas, now that consumers are empowered, it makes logical sense. Because now it isn't that, bad advertising has always been less effective, but you can't force it on people anymore. So this is the cost of entry instead of the benefit. So those are the impacts. And if you look at them as a whole, if we're in the ideas business, which I'm going to assume, suddenly ideas are much different than they were when we built our entire industry. Literally, the output of what we're doing looks nothing like it did when we first started. So, understandably, agencies decided we need to fix this. And so they changed their process, and they reorganize, and they buy somebody, they shift people around. The same people shifting them around, maybe change your title, get a new business card. And that basically led to this as my thesis, which is these are the wrong conversations. It has process is important. Let's get to that problem. Let's look at the one that's actually got us on fire right now, which is the talent and the skill sets of the people developing the creative ideas need to change. So I've labeled these skills as a collection of them, media design. I'm going to lay out what those 4 skills are. But I would, in a nutshell, I'd like to just kind of explain this. So media design, what do I mean by that? Understanding and manipulating media environments. It's a skill for creatives, right? Creatives, this is the key part of that. And what are those skills? How can you understand and manipulate media? How? And this is the philosophical approach that underpins everything in my thesis, which is it's thinking about media as a canvas instead of as a container. In traditional media, there's a container model. You make it, you drop it into this container, you make it, you drop it into this container. Now you're looking at a world of canvases, and those canvases change your idea. You can't let it go, because by the very nature, it is going to change what you've put onto it. So you need to approach it that way. I'll get into specific skills here, but that's the philosophy that underpins this. That was the thesis. Why? Because media is more relevant than ever in the creative process. I mean, that's just a fact. And what it's not is media planning. And so this is not media planning, this is not media planning, this is not media planning. So I've said it 3 times, it can't possibly be mistaken anymore. And we'll, if we have enough time, we'll get to that. So what are the 4 skills? The first one is what I call not tweeting too hard. Or more formally, understand the impact of the channel on the content. So there was I think I showed this site to a few of you guys, but basically Tweeting Too Hard is a website where people take people's tweets that are self-involved and pretentious, and they give them backpats. So you get voted up, think of it as voted up in infamy, because your tweet was just too self-involved. So my favorite one is, I gave my maid a raise today when she didn't ask for it, because that's how I'm fighting the recession. Which is just like wow, that's a bold statement, right? Now, when you look at that, if he and Twitter was always positioned as microblogging, right? Twitter, when you hear their sales pitch, it's microblogging. We're bringing blogs to the people, baby. The issue, though, is that when you write that on your blog, great. I mean, yeah, you might get a few funny comments or eye rolls, but you haven't crossed a line, because for some reason it's okay on your blog. I mean, yeah, you're like, well, this guy's a bit of a douchebag, but you're not actually offended by that particular premise, because you went to his blog. The second he tweets it out, it goes into a Twitter feed that you've subscribed to. But now you're being interrupted because you basically said, hey, I'm open to hearing about things. But for some reason, this comment is completely unacceptable now that he's tweeted it out, even though people have subscribed to him. So Twitter, therefore, isn't microblogging, because we've just said, hey, that doesn't work anymore outside the blog environment. Twittering appears to just be that, twittering. The channel itself has changed the content. The thresholds around what content is okay have just changed dramatically because of the environment. And so when I say media designers don't tweet too hard, the person on this team with this skill set is the one who can tell you, hey, this idea, when applied to this canvas, has to look and act differently. It violates these rules. It doesn't capitalize on these rules. This content is no longer okay. Skill set number 2. Media designers use media as a creative input. So this is the other thing that's happened in a lot of agencies, and why I gave that history, which is media was always seen as an output, right? Creatives get done, they hand over the baton, and then the media people say, great, I'll go get your minimum number of GRPs. Again, that might have made sense at some point. It just doesn't. It feels like a missed opportunity now. In most agencies, account planners do qualitative and quantitative research to get data. Media is our most underutilized opportunity to understand consumers. And so, again, the skill here is using media as a lens to understand your consumer. One piece of work that I really liked, I think we all really liked, was Whopper Sacrifice by Burger King, which I think recently won at Cannes as well. Yeah, it's a clever idea, and it had a lot of buzz around it, very crispin. But if you actually look at the brilliance behind that idea, they didn't ideate in a vacuum and then say, now let's go make a Facebook app of this. What they did was they said, you know what, young people, specifically, males 16 to 24, are socially obligated to accept friend requests from people they don't want to be friends with. They don't want to be friends. I mean, if you Google, help my mom join Facebook, this is a major trend with millions of people that are frustrated by the fact that my dad is 73 and friended me on Facebook recently. I have to be his friend. He's my dad. He's only got 6 friends, so if I drop him, he'll know. And what Whopper Sacrifice did was it came in and it said, hey, as a brand, we can solve this problem because we're looking at media and we understand what's happening in the media culture that's developed around Facebook, and now the brand can help you solve your problem. Sure, we're going to dress it up and make it funny, but the reality of it is we're letting you untie yourself from the 10 people you don't want to be friends with. And that is a media insight that led to a creative idea. I want to be clear, media doesn't lead to creative, but it was an input into the creative idea. And I think that is a brilliant way to use media. That is a lens into your consumer. Skill number 3 is something, so I call it using the YouTube rule, okay? Who here has seen a video on YouTube? Yes, Ricky, I'm assuming even though you're not raising your hand, you have. Who here has shared a video with someone else, said, hey, go check out this video on YouTube? And the jury hasn't done anything, it seems. And who here has uploaded a video to YouTube? Okay, so those are 3 very different concentric rings of people, right? And not even necessarily concentric in this room concentric, right? So you have the entire audience that views it, you have the audience that shares videos, and then you have the audience that actually uploads those videos, okay? You know, for a long time in business, people refer to the 80-20 rule. Turns out in digital, it looks more like a 90-10 rule, okay? But this applies to media environments in a very important way. If you look at a media planner to come in and be your media designer, it fails, because the media planner says, YouTube, 89 million unique users a month. Because to them, that's scale. It's about scale. That is the total audience of YouTube. I've done my job. I'm a media planner. But a media designer would actually say, how can I build an idea that capitalizes on that 10%, then engages that middle group, which in this was about 50%, to reach the 100% of that audience. You build an idea specifically to engage one group versus another versus another. You scale that way. The idea has to be built that way. Your media plan can't compensate for the idea not being built to do that from the get-go. The 4th one is, so my most hated phrase in the world is media agnostic. And actually people attempt, when they're attempting to compliment me, say this all the time, which is, oh, I love your ideas, they're media agnostic, which is actually just proves I'm terrible at my job. Because this phrase doesn't mean anything. I mean, this is how traditional media-minded people think about new media, which is, oh yeah, I want a media agnostic idea. There's no such thing as a media agnostic idea. I don't know a creative in the world who could just say, here's the idea, distribute it as needed, please. It just doesn't make sense. And you know, common sense implies that, but yet somehow this has kind of worked its way, you know, into culture. So what a media designer should be able to do as part of the creative team is they actually architect the ideas with the media. Someone who can come in and say, the role of media, the role of this medium versus this medium leads to this idea. Or the other way around. That's a wonderful idea. Let me help you think through how those ideas would come to life in different ways and how the idea would have to change to use this particular medium or this particular medium. You know, the Obama campaign did this as wonderful. It's embarrassing for us as the ad industry as a whole that it took a presidency, but it actually makes sense, which is the Obama campaign was probably the best use of architecting media I've seen ever. And it was done so well because they had their overarching vision, which most brands can't play in, which is literally changing the world. It took something that powerful to kind of allow this to happen. But then someone on that team, and a lot of people give credit to a guy named Chris Murphy, but really it's a collection of people that were able to say, okay, I am going to tell you how this can be applied differently using this medium, why this part of the idea makes the most sense here versus here. And the idea will change. You watch the Obama campaign actually start shifting what they were doing as they started understanding how the media was being utilized to the broader idea. In this case, change the world. So again, those are the 4 skills, just kind of recapped, not in funny language. Understanding the impact of the channel, leveraging media as a lens, crafting media scalable ideas, and architecting ideas with media. If you look at this particular list, and this goes back to a point I was making earlier about creative departments being very executional, all of these are intended to make someone accountable for the actual creation of ideas. Accountable, that doesn't mean solely responsible, right? So everyone inside any ad agency should be able to concept ideas, and your creative department better damn well be able to do it. But no one is accountable as it relates to a formalized skill set that actually develops this ability to make ideas. And I think that these collection of skills could actually be a way to make someone accountable. If this were an arc inside of a job arc, inside of a creative department, you would not only have people accountable for ideas that aren't just creative directors. Let's say, you know, the bad creative directors at your agencies were probably promoted because they're really good writers or art directors, but they don't know anything about ideas. You guys might know that as a group, but again, you did that in spite of your agency. It's not formalized at any agency I encountered. This feels like a collection of skills that you could actually quantify and measure someone on and actually help them be accountable for the idea. So And because David asked, he wanted to know, after reading my thesis, actually the first thing he said was, so what? And then the second thing he said was, so why hasn't this happened before? And so I wanted to just talk about kind of some of the barriers that are facing media design from happening. Number one is, actually it is happening. It's just that most of you guys and myself don't work at the company it's happening at because it's the media company, right? So Ricky, although she laughs and whatnot, is actually up to a very insidious activity, which is media companies, media agencies, are more and more talking about how they understand content in their media environments, right? Now, they haven't formalized it like this, but they're absolutely doing that. So when you're wondering, oh, why isn't Omnicom or Publicis doing this? They are. They're just not doing it with your particular department. And so this is something, it's not formalized like this, and it hasn't been structured this way, which I think is going to hold them back. But right now, they see the opportunity coming out of the media department, and that's a media agency. So that's barrier number one. Barrier number two is the way we talk about media and creative. It just confuses the issue. We don't have better words. It would be insane to try to change them now. But again, media means different things to different people. Creative means different things to different people, as we discussed about our school yesterday. So yeah, that confuses the issue. But I think a frank discussion at any one person's agency could help solve that. The third barrier is execution is a bad word, right? So sometimes people get their hackles up when they're, I'm not an executional creative, I'm a concept creative. I've never seen any problem with execution. Execution is more important than ever, but for some reason in agency culture, that's a dirty word. So it's difficult when someone has to hear, well, this person is responsible for the concept. Again, everyone helps with execution. Everyone helps with concept. But what doesn't exist at agencies right now is a job division and skill specifically around one versus the other, because I think it's a lot to ask to say you do both all the time in a changing media world. The fourth barrier is, that the skills haven't been formalized. That was literally, to me, this is what no one has kind of stepped up and done, and what the purpose of my thesis was. What does that mean? What does media design mean? It's a set of these skills. This is how you quantify them. That was what my thesis was about. And so I think overcoming the barriers, to me at least, sounded like an opportunity for creative leadership. So with that, I say thanks. Don't tell Terry Sweeney. Thank you.